Chasing Utopia. That is what we are doing. Republicans are doing it, Democrats are doing it, human beings all over the world are doing it. We're chasing utopia. Now, we're coming at it from different angles. And that is what's causing all our problems, I suppose you could say. But at this point, I would humbly request that you read, if not everything, most of the stuff I've written at braidzone.com, aka www.braid.zone. Go ahead and read the website, and you'll see that, like, the fundamental premise, besides rope, is that balance is what we're all striving towards. And I think that is true of both Western and Eastern philosophies. Now, that in no way takes away from striving after something, for that is the meaning of life. Life as we know it here on earth is to set goals and set about achieving them. And as long as you're working toward a goal, you will find a lot of happiness in doing that. Now, I guess one caveat in that is that you should not be making other people's lives difficult. So when we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you understand that, like, the fact that it was deemed possible for everyone to even be striving after that and yet not interfere with each other's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that is quite something, isn't it? So I think we all want to do that. So I want to touch on some of these topics here, even though I named the title of this video Democrats. I want to point out that we're all kind of working towards the same thing, only from different angles. I think that is the case ultimately, because who really wants to be angry? Now, having said that, we know that the news is designed to appeal to your ability to get angry quickly. Although that's a simplification. I mean, news started off as a real intent to want to uncover some truths, and then over time, as more truths are uncovered and the response to those truths is seen as, in a sense, balanced in its own way, leading to indifference. Some people really care a lot, and some people don't care. And that those results are interesting. So to bring it back home, Republicans, we're looking to achieve a balanced level of happiness where everyone kind of, quote unquote, knows their role and goes about it accordingly. And then Democrats, I think the reason we consider them progressive and then the Republicans conservative, they're just trying to get there faster. So that's why it always leads towards socialism and communism. They want to force that issue. They want to force that utopia that we're all chasing after more quickly than the right does. The right has a more pragmatic sense of how the world works and tends to work. Now, we're all getting to some point eventually. I think that can be said to be the case. But would you define it as a upward trajectory, a downward trajectory, or a completely random trajectory? What would you define it as? Well, there might be some disagreement on that as well. But what we can certainly say is that we now have computers and live streaming, whereas we used to just have rocks and sticks. So I think we're making some progress. I think we're doing well overall. Now, consider the atomic bomb. One could easily say it was far too extreme to be deployed, but did the researchers who worked on it know that they would be able to achieve that level of power and destruction, which, by the way, meets the qualifications of certain biblical revelations? Isn't that interesting? There was a time when people might have thought you to be silly for saying there is some sort of weapon that could cause almost immediate extinction, but here we are. We have it, and we have had it for almost 100 years. I mean, 80 years, we could say at this point, which is a blip in the radar over human history. So, what are we working towards? What are we striving towards? We are constrained by a lot, by our own human nature and our own inclinations that we have. So, who can truly be said to be free? When we talk about freedom or even liberty, what are we even talking about? We're still figuring that out. I mean, there's just a lot that none of us know. I want to perhaps stress that more than anything. When we think about the recent situation that we've gone through with COVID, and when we think about these current situations that have broken out, wars that have broken out in Israel, Gaza, and in Ukraine, isn't it silly? Like, I think people throughout time have known that war is extremely silly, and yet we resort to it a lot of times because certain people are trying to achieve utopia more quickly than the rest of us. And everyone has a little bit different idea even of what utopia can mean. Now, these are all everything I'm saying is in the class of speculations, and in a sense, do those all have to be figured out before we figure out why we're all here in the first place? I think it is important to point out that, we as human beings, what separates us from the animals, regardless of any medical material similarities, the fact that we think on this level, the fact that we have the capability of thinking on this level, of speculating what it all means, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we here for? Are we here for God's delight? I kind of think yes to that. I think if you want me to stop speaking mysteriously, I would just say that we are essentially God's pets, and we're kind of like on that level up the chain of events. If you want to say that the way we consider our pets to us, little cute, fuzzy creatures that, sometimes mess up and sometimes do great. But yet we delight in them either way because they're trying. That's a metaphor I've been using for quite a few years now, and I think it makes sense. I think the Bible itself even speaks of the shepherd and sheep metaphor, which is very, very similar to the pet metaphor. I think the only reason I changed it was to make it appeal to modern audiences. Because not a lot of us have sheep anymore, but we certainly a lot of us have cats and dogs, and we see that they're very cute and they each have their own personalities, and we understand their restrictions very, very well. We understand them as a subset of our own restrictions. Well, God, I think, has a super set of restrictions over us. I think as long as we do things that delight God, um, in a certain sense, we're just doing what we should be doing. I could say fulfilling our purpose or living out destiny and fate, but I would choose to break it down maybe to a lesser terminology of just, hey, we're doing what we should be doing, what we're kind of expected to be doing to delight God. So, so that all being said, why did I title this video Democrats? Well, Democrats have, in very recent years, we know, resorted to some pretty wild tactics to try to maintain their position of influence. I mean, you could call it power, but it's silly. Do any of us have power? Like, if you have to think in terms of our restrictions. We all still have to poop every day. We have to sleep for like, at least a couple hours, if not 6 to 8 hours. We shut down every night, and yet we still consider ourselves capable of having actual power. I don't think so. I think it's a big chess game. It's kind of like a big strategy game that we're playing. And it's I think it's proper to consider that those at the extremes of the current human experience that we have, and its relative nature to what we might call power, just being able to maybe call more shots. If you look at either extreme, the low extreme would be like the homeless, right? Homeless, orphans, kids. I mean, just people who really don't have a lot of power at all. The other extreme is people who have power. And I think it is interesting to look into each person who currently has power and their past. And they started off as a kid. They all started off as like kids. Uh, some of them maybe like born into a household that wielded some form of power, but many kids who didn't, many kids who were just born into a either middle class or like, just poor class family, and through circumstance and maybe some of their own efforts and just doing what we all do as human beings, which is try to figure things out on the fly for quite a while, for several decades. And then once we start to see patterns repeating, then we're at more of a liberty to start assessing what the heck everything is all about and what's really going on. So then that's where your philosophical writings, articulations start to happen. And strangely enough, philosophy itself does encourage and inspire political leaders and military leaders to achieve certain things. Isn't that something? So everyone is improvising. I would like to just hammer that point home. Everyone's improvising. Everyone's figuring things out on the fly, moment to moment. Even world leaders. I think that's fairly obvious because we see that the way societies and governments are run are extremely flawed and inefficient. And at any given moment, the government just happens to be the business that has achieved the most, dominance by physical force and by structure. And so, we can whine and complain all we want, but the governments of the world, which Thomas Paine, my boy, always said was fundamentally an evil that we shouldn't need. So to my anarchists out there, I sympathize with you. I know that in terms of a utopia, yes, anarchy would be the ultimate when everyone's kind of doing what they want and yet not infringing and hurting other people. But since some people are disposed to hurt, deceive, and take advantage of other people, therefore, that's why we need governments. We do actually need some sort of system of people who care about the well-being of others. So that's why we have it. But you can think of a government as kind of the chief business, the chief corporation that exists in a certain landmass, because we know that land is a fundamental fact as well of governments. Here is our land. Here are the borders that we claim. And how do the rest of you recognize those borders? Yes. Okay. Now we're good. So that's kind of what it's about. And so now everything that we're doing is from all of our different angles, our special snowflake angles, which are multitude. We're trying to imagine and then perhaps achieve utopia. So I think I might leave it at that tonight. I think perhaps I'll speak more on it later, but many philosophers, many political leaders have come and gone over the ages, and yet where are we now? Are we a little closer to figuring everything out? I think so. I think maybe a little bit, but isn't it interesting to consider how long it takes to achieve even a little bit of meaningful ground in this discovery process that we're all on? And so, in a certain sense, you do need to make amends with that. You need to come to terms with that. I think a lot of Eastern philosophy has done probably the best job of articulating that aspect of it. And then those of us in the West, yeah, perhaps we are more the ones who are striving and trying to really find out what are the limits of what we can achieve. And then paradoxically, when Western societies do that, we also either encourage or create the opposite reaction of people on the low end who want to deconstruct or destroy or break down everything that's been created or discovered. It's almost like they want to say, ho, 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 rein it in, horsey. They want to rein in that horsey of discovery. Rein it in. Wait for the rest of us to catch up. But then at the same time, they have their own idealistic imaginings. So, perhaps you can think of it as like two wavelengths at a time taking place. It is what we're all doing. This is the human project. I hope we can come together peacefully more in the future as we realize that this is what we're doing. But at the same time, don't try to force square pegs into round holes. Like learn where we are, all of us in the current paradigm. And anytime you find yourself trying to like fast track and just force beliefs, mindsets, worldviews on everyone else, that's where you're going to have a lot of problems. I mean, that's where both conservatives and liberals have had problems over time. I mean, whichever one gains power at a extensive degree, perhaps too much, they start wielding their influence and trying to fit their square peg into a round hole, or if you would say from the other end, their round peg into a square hole. Can you call it that? Opening. So we're all trying to figure everything out, and our best, perhaps only way of doing that is trying to figure each other out. So that's what we continue to do. That's what Democrats are doing, the title of my video. That's what Republicans are doing, not the title of my video. And perhaps we'll get there someday. I certainly hope so. You certainly hope so. All of us hope so. But just keep in mind that the utopia that we're striving towards in our own mind might be different in a lot of ways from other people's utopia that they're striving towards. And who's to say whether those utopias are incompatible or not?